2 is part of the Batman Podcast Network. For more information, go to batman-on-film.com. Hi, this is Matt Bradley Shurkey, host of Sequelcast 2. This episode is special because we'll start with a brief interview I did with Kevin Given. He's the creator of the Carl Vincent character.
After the credits roll, there's always more to tell, especially when the video sales are doing really well. From Shock Treatment to Jason X to Police Academy 6, this is Sequel Cast, and they are unsurpassed at following a franchise until the bitter end. This is Sequel Cast, and your hosts have asked that I inform you that the show will now begin.
Hello and welcome to Sequelcast 2, a podcast looking at movies in a franchise one film at a time. I'm Matt Bradley Shurkey, and with me we have a very special guest, Kevin Given, who is here to talk about these Dracula Rising comics and books and movie that he's working on related to the Carl Vincent character. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Vampires have been around in so many different forms over the years. What do you think made vampires jump out to you? Like, when's the first time you saw a vampire in a movie or a TV show that made you think it was cool?
That would be Dark Shadows, Barnabas Collins.
Yeah, that's been on for so long. Was it the original black and white version, or?
Yeah, it was. I was coming home from school and happened to catch it one night. I think it was on ABC TV, and that was my first exposure to the whole vampire genre.
And was it something you watched every day after that, or by yourself, with your family, with your friends?
Yeah, I was kind of a couch potato. I'd sit there and watch that, and then it'd be the Brady Bunch and Partridge Family and all that, all those half-hour sitcoms that were in syndication. And Star Trek was one of my favorites. But that's my first exposure to the whole area of vampires.
And it really was ahead of its time with this portrayal of the supernatural.
Yes, it was amazing. They used a lot of H.P. Lovecraft on those shows. For a low-budget show, it was very well written, and for a soap opera.
Yeah, I've only seen the beginning episodes, which is before Barnabas was on, and the mystery would be like, oh, is it a ghost? The door just opened. So I was looking through the comic sample you sent me of Dracula Rising, and I really like the mixture of, you have vampires that look more monstrous, like a Nosferatu thing flying around. You also have like ninjas and all sorts of influence from different genres. It's always neat to see the mixture of the supernatural and other genres, like a detective story.
Yeah, that's why I kind of don't just focus on vampires. I throw, I got a werewolf coming up and other type of supernatural stuff. Sebastian Vasilis came back as a ghost in Last Rites, and he's coming back in this story too. It'll be in issue 3, actually.
Oh, great. I noticed you said you had worked with this character in different formats with Carl Vincent. It originally was like a screenplay, then you did novels and a comic, and you're working on a movie.
Yes, that's correct. I went to Writers Boot Camp out in Los Angeles, and I studied with the Long Ridge Writers Group. They taught me how to structure stories and character development. And I wrote the script first and kind of worked on the novel when I was doing security work. On the overnight shift, I had a lot of free time, so I worked on the novel then. And I took the script and gave it to my artists who started drawing it. Now with Dracula Rising, we don't even have a script. We're just kind of winging it as we go. I tell him what I want, kind of like the old Marvel way.
Oh, yeah.
I tell him what I want, and he just draws it. Rodolfo is probably the best artist I ever commissioned for these stories.
I see the picture of you there on the Facebook holding up the physical issues. That must have been a special moment.
Yeah, I had them printed through Kablam, and I'm thinking about putting them on Indie Planet. But another bit of good news, I might have a publisher. There's no contract signed yet, so I can't say who it is, but there might be a publisher putting the comics out very soon.
Well, that's fantastic. We were talking a bit offline when you contacted me about different vampire movies and sequels and so forth.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking back to the original Dracula, how many different versions there were. Did you have a favorite with Christopher Lee or?
It's kind of toss up between Lugosi and Lee. I mean,
Mhm.
Lugosi's the movie was actually Todd Browning was kind of strange. The climax took place off screen and everything else, but Lugosi's presence kept that movie going, and he was phenomenal. And every Dracula since then has tried to emulate what Lugosi did, but Christopher Lee had a certain sophistication, a nobility about him that made him an awesome Dracula. And then a close third would be Gary Oldman in the Francis Ford Coppola version.
Right, I think to the Bela Lugosi Dracula, there's a scene early on. Harker goes into Dracula's castle, and there's an armadillo just wandering around.
Yeah, I remember that.
But also with the Christopher Lee, he did so many Dracula movies, even though in later interviews he said he didn't want to do them, and he keeps on reducing his dialogue so he wouldn't have to say lines.
Exactly. He did more Dracula movies than any other actor, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it. As many Dracula movies have been made, you'd think they'd get a lot to reprise the role, a lot of actors. But he did more than anyone else, and I guess John Carradine played him second most amount of times.
Right, and
Lugosi only played Dracula twice, with the original Dracula movie and with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Isn't that funny? That's the only other movie he played Dracula in, and yet you think over time, when people think of Dracula, they think of Lugosi.
Right. He did play other vampires, I guess, for Columbia, but they couldn't use the name Dracula. And those movies were not as well made as the Universal ones, if I remember right. I think I've only seen one of those.
Right. They don't show them on TV as much as they used to, but they have those sets with the Dracula, House of Dracula, those sort of things.
Exactly.
You'd also mentioned the Lost Boys.
Oh yeah, Kiefer Sutherland. To me, that's his tour de force performance. He hasn't, for me anyway, he hasn't done anything as good as David the vampire in Lost Boys since that movie. He completely commanded that movie. It was a fantastic performance.
Well, it really brought vampires to a lazy West Coast beach town. It gave it a very different flavor than the typical European castle setting.
Exactly. 80s kind of punk new wave look for the vampires.
Right, and then there's a Cry Little Sister and then some of that stuff on the soundtrack.
Yeah, Cry Little Sister, Foreigner, Lost in the Shadows, a lot of good music on that one.
I watched one of the sequels, I think it was the second Lost Boys movie, and instead of Kiefer Sutherland, they have his fatter cousin playing basically the same part, which is amusing.
Exactly. Yeah, they seem to have the atmosphere down, but the plot kind of didn't really gel, and the acting was kind of weak, in my view, anyway.
Yeah, and yet that movie did well enough for them to do a third one, so who knows? It's a title people recognize. I'm a bit surprised. We haven't seen a remake of that, and yet we've seen a remake of Fright Night.
Exactly. Lost Boys stands alone, I guess.
Yeah, also with Dracula and vampires, I think of Monster Squad is another one.
Yes, the actor, I can't think of, Duncan Reiger played Dracula in that one. Really good performance in a mediocre movie.
Sure, and in more recent times, specifically with Dracula, you had Dracula 2000, which was a strange one, linking Dracula to Judas.
Yeah, that was interesting, but it was kind of, the Dracula was kind of, I don't know, he wasn't in it that much, actually.
Not really. If you like vampires, there's a really good comedy called What They Do in Shadows. Have you seen that one?
No, that one I haven't seen. Where's that on?
It's probably streaming on Netflix or something like that, and it's an improvisational kind of mockumentary about a house with all sorts of vampires, and you have a character that represents like a effeminate Anne Rice vampire. You have one that's more like Gary Oldman Dracula vampire.
Right.
And it's funny, quirky New Zealand movie with the
Sounds
Shadows.
Check that one out.
Yeah, that one's pretty good. You don't see vampire comedies too often. And when you're working on your stories and you're having elements of comedy in there, how do you decide what the line is? Because if you make it too silly, it takes away from like the horror of the vampires, and yet you want to have a storyline going and not have the comedy make it seem like a spoof the whole time.
Right. Well, I think Ghostbusters was a good example of a horror comedy that did it pretty much right. The horror element was there, and the comedy element with, of course, Saturday Night Live alumnus, and that was pretty straightforward. The comedy was good, the horror was good. Also, like we mentioned, Lost Boys, Fright Night, those movies kind of set the standard. But, then there's those vampires suck movies, which those movies pretty much suck. It's pretty bad, and they try too hard to be funny, and the horror element isn't really in that. So if you can balance the horror and the comedy, you can make a really good movie.
One that I don't think is a great comedy vampire movie, but it has some good jokes, is Mel Brooks' final film to date, Dracula Dead and Loving It, with Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah, Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Yep. And
yeah.
The more you know about Dracula, the more you really can get some of the jokes in that film, even with lines of dialogue. The bats fly in and poop on the stairs, and he says, "Children of a night, what a mess they make." And that's a takeoff on the line, "What music they make."
Yeah. Yeah, that was a decent one. And, of course, Young Frankenstein was his tour de force.
Well, certainly the cinematography and the music, especially in that, it could come out of the original Universal films. And in fact, some of the props were. So writing is a difficult, lonely process. When you're sitting down to start one of your stories, do you have any rituals you do to kind of get in the mood? Or do you write at the same time every day? Or just when inspiration hits you?
Well, when I get the inspiration, like when I saw The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, it was like really late at night and I was trying to fall asleep. But then when I thought, oh my God, this is going to work, then I just jumped right up and I started taking notes and outlining it before I went to sleep.
And the outline still made sense the next morning?
Well, to a degree, I had to redo some of it. But, it's just like when it hits me, then I write. Because I tried writing a Western and a science fiction story before I did Carl Vincent, but it didn't really gel with me. I had to force myself to get in front of my laptop and start writing. But with Carl Vincent, I had to force myself away from the laptop. I was just sitting there for hours on end, writing. So when I get the feeling that this is going to be good, I'm there at the laptop, and I don't stop.
Do you find revision difficult?
To a degree, because when you first read it and you thought you wrote a masterpiece, and you see all this stuff in there that you don't think should be there,
right? You
got to take it out. But then when you take it out, you think, should I have taken that out? Yeah, so there's a lot of difficult stuff in revising, making it gel in the way it would, for a reader to enjoy it.
So what's going on with the Carl Vincent movie?
Yes, I put the script online on a site where producers look for projects to work on. And I had just moved back to Florida, actually. And Jeffrey Crisp, who is Crisp Filmworks out of Lakeland, he's been in several shorts and movies, and he's produced some stuff. This is his first time trying to produce a full major motion picture. He got a hold of the script and contacted me. And we filmed a few scenes already. And now I believe we're going to go for funding, but I can't tell where it's coming from yet because none of the paperwork's been signed.
Sure.
It'll be a big announcement. If anyone's interested, they can go to Facebook, like my Carl Vincent page, like his Last Rites page, or you can go to YouTube and subscribe to my channel, Comics Let's Talk, Kevin Given.
Excellent. Let's see. So what sort of feedback have you gotten from your novels from the readers? Has it influenced any of the sequel novels to the original?
Well, so far it's been good. I have a picture of the first girl who read Foul Blood. I took a picture with her and used it on my interview with the Vampire Library page. She was the first one to read it, and she thought it was like one of the best mystery novels she'd ever read. Foul Blood reads more like the old noir style mysteries, like Dashiell Hammett and Mickey Spillane,
Mhm.
Raymond Chandler type of things. But then there's only one vampire in it, and this is Carl's first encounter with a vampire. And I created the characters. David Reynolds is the serial killer. I based a lot of these characters on real people because I wanted a gritty type of realism. So I based David Reynolds on Danny Rawlings, who, was a killer here in Florida. And then I based Leo Kowalski, the owner of First Impressions, the club where the bodies are piling up out back. I based him on the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski, the real mafia hitman, just to give it that realism.
When you study especially the old mafia stories, it's very disturbing what they could get away with in an era with a lot less technology.
Exactly. That's why I used Mafia Hitman as the owner of the club. In the story, he went to jail for a time and didn't rat out his friends, so they gave him that club as a kind of a gift. And
Right.
he's cash cow for him. So,
Is there a novel that people seem to think is their favorite that you've done so far?
of the novels,
Yep.
well, Last Rites has had more exposure, and it's more of an epic adventure. I got a lot of positive reviews on Amazon, and basically it starts in Boston, and they have to go to Cairo. They're trying to prevent the resurrection of the three most dangerous vampires. It's a female trinity with the Hebrew Lilith, Egyptian Sekhmet, and the Hindu Kali. Once they're all resurrected, then they will become all-powerful and subjugate mankind to their will, type of thing. So Lilith has already been resurrected at the beginning of the story, and Kyle is recruited by the ghost of his arch-nemesis, who is Sebastian Basilis,
Ah.
to go on this vampire hunting crusade. It's kind of like a Magnificent Seven meets Fearless Vampire Killers type of thing. And he has to have several vampire hunters to go with him. Now people ask, why would Sebastian, who is the arch-nemesis of Carl, lead Carl on this mission? And his answer is that he's in purgatory, which makes sense to Carl's Catholic way of thinking. And he's trying to redeem himself and make it into heaven, so he's helping Carl with this mission to prevent the resurrection of all these vampires, which will destroy the earth.
And it's always a
Of
fun
course.
moment in those kind of stories where the team gets together.
Yeah, I have a really great team in this book. I got my ninja warrior, which is Kate Bryant, and she witnessed her father killed when she was only 8 years old by a Yakuza. So her uncle led her to a sensei. Her uncle had hurt his back in a car accident. He couldn't fight, so he brought Kate to a sensei, and she learned martial arts, the ways of the ninja, in order to grow up and seek revenge on the death of her father. And then I have Thor, my character called the Greek god Thor. He's kind of a shell-shocked, special needs immortal. He was worshipped as Hercules in Greece, and when he went to the Norwegian lands, he was worshipped as Thor. And he kind of gets the past confused. Did this happen as when he was Hercules or when he was Thor? He's a kind of little shell-shocked, little humorous character who winds up being the muscle of the group. And Athena Timon is my 2,000-year-old immortal. She's trapped in the body of a 12-year-old due to an ancient curse, and she has to go along on the mission to break the curse so she can start aging and look the way she should. And those are the main characters.
Great, and it sounds like the best way for people to find out more information about the books is to go to the Facebook page.
Yeah, the comics are going to be out soon for Dracula Rising. There are comics for the others, but the artwork, though good, is not as good as for Dracula Rising. So I'm going to have my new artist redraw them. Rodolfo Ezequiel is the new artist, and I've had a lot of praise about his art. People have read the comics and said this is really good. The art stands out, and it makes it worth reading.
One last question I can think of. When doing research of vampires from different countries or the undead from different countries, did you notice any similarities between the old legends?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. The European vampires, and I can't remember all the details actually at this
Sure.
time, but the European vampires are a bit different than the Asian vampires. They all have the same, they have to drink blood and with the same weaknesses. Some vampires are killed by sunlight, and some are just really allergic to sunlight, and it won't kill them, but they can't stand it. And there's, subtle differences throughout the different vampire lore.
I'm always amused in China you can't show skeletons, but you can have a ghost, you can have, a lot of violence with blood and things, but skeletons are off limits for some reason.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've got skeletons in Dracula Rising, so I don't know. I didn't know about that one.
I only knew about it. There's a game, World of Warcraft, and in some article it mentioned when they brought it to China, they had to take out all the skeletons.
Oh, in China. Okay.
China, yeah.
Oh, the Chinese. Yeah, that's a new one to me. I didn't really read up too much on the Chinese or the Asian vampires like I did for the European ones, because I don't have any Chinese vampires in this story. But I'm going to have some soon, so I'll probably be doing a lot of research into that area too.
Pretty cool. Thank you so much for your time to come on talking about vampires and some vampire movies. Any last thing you want to say?
Thank you for having me.
Oh, sure, not a problem.
Just don't forget, if you're interested in checking it out, you can look at the first issue for free on this Tapas website, TAPAS. Anyone that's interested can check that out. Go to Facebook if you like it, and like my Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter page, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Comics Let's Talk Kevin Given.
And anything exciting coming on the YouTube page?
Well, I've got a brand new co-host, actually. She did one show with me, which was the history of Action Comics, and her name's April Childers. She's a very pretty girl. And she helped me along with that, and now I have a co-host, and we have some good banter going on there, so I think it'll be a vast improvement to the show.
All right, Kevin, well, thanks so much. We'll send you a link when the show goes up. It should be within the next week or so.
Oh, thank you.
And that was our show for this week. I'm Kevin Gibbon.
And I'm April Childers.
And together we say, keep reading those comics.